Hello team and welcome to another ATP Geopolitics video with myself, Jonathan MS Pearce. This is Ukraine War Frontline update for the 10th of November 2023. I've just come off the back of a live stream. Please go and check that out where I had a chat to Tim White. Lots of great questions and hopefully some decent answers for you there. And also my news pieces this morning. Right, let's go to the front line. Of course, if you don't know what the lines on my video mean, well, then you need to check out Where Are You? I haven't got myself together enough yet to put the legend on the screen, other than my good self. So if you don't know what the stuff means on my map, what the lines mean, please check out this key and it should tell you what they mean. Right, pause the video there. Okay, we go to the northeast, Kupiansk to Svatova to Kreminna. As you can see, no changes to the map as far as my mapping sources are concerned, although the ISW, Institute for the Study of War, American military think tank, says geolocated footage published on November the 9th indicates that Russian forces recently marginally advanced south of Persho-Travnevi. Where is that? Well, that's in this northern part of the axis up here, just to the east of Kupiansk, Persho-Travnevi, and perhaps some gain for the Russians in this area. We'll see what the source says. This is a video that shows the destruction of Russian equipment, probably somewhere near the village of Persho-Travnevi. Well, this is the geolocated, the geolocation, the coordinates. We'll plug that into Google Earth and see what it has to say. And that suggests if that is where, and again, I had to say this all the time, if that is an attack by the Russian forces, then they might be moving into the grey zone, and it could be that they are still robustly controlling an area to the north of there, as Andrew Perpetua says, or it could be that that is where the Russians control and the Ukrainians have hit them within their control zone. So both of those lines could still be correct. It's just really difficult to know with a mere geolocation of some destroyed stuff. But nonetheless, that just to give you the idea that that is in between the two mappers, and the claim from the ISW is that shows Russian advances. So they are pushing there. In fact, if we look right along this axis, there are all the normal place names pop up in the ISW when they are saying where there are repelled attacks. We're going to come down to Bakhmut, and I said in the live stream actually, this now looks like a place where there's been a change in momentum. The Russians seem to have put a lot of pressure on the Ukrainians over the last week. We've not seen the Ukrainians press even to the south in and around Avdiivka and Klishchivka, and the Russians, according to Syriac maps, are themselves pushing back, taking some more territory, as according to, as I say, Syriac maps in that area to the east and the north of Klishchivka as well, pushing back across the railway line. Russians now controlling the tree line on the near side of the railway line to the Ukrainian forces, as I say, to Syriac maps, not confirmed by the other mappers though. Well, the ISW has a whole section at the top on Bakhmut, which I think I'll share with you because it's quite important, and it kind of goes towards what I've just been saying, which is the Russian forces are likely launched opportunistic localized offensive operations in the Bakhmut direction and intensified ground attacks near Bakhmut in recent days. Ukrainian General Staff reported the Russian forces conducted nearly 30 attacks northwest and southwest of Bakhmut between the 8th and 9th, and notably a higher number of attacks than the Ukrainian General Staff typically reports in the area. So there's been a change of trend, a change of activity there. Russian mill bloggers widely claim that Russian forces entered Klishchivka. So this is interesting. So claims that the Russians are now back in Klishchivka, most probably the northern areas thereof, and pushed Ukrainian troops back from the railway line that runs northeast and east of the settlement. Geolocated footage published on November the 9th indicates that Russian forces have advanced towards Klishchivka and hold positions just east of the settlement and west of the railway line. So let's check out the geolocation that the ISW references here, and it's the work of the White Wolves, I think, on Russian targets. So where are the Russian targets? Oops, they are here. No, they're not. It appears that nothing has happened to that. We'll go back. So the Russian targets are indeed here. Second try at that. So that does support what Syriac Maps is saying in how the Russians have supposedly crossed the railway line and taken control of this tree line just to the east of Klishchiivka. I presume Andrew Perpetua will catch up to that on his next mapping run, possibly, or might contest that they have full control over that. I don't know. Right, to continue, some Russian sources claim that Russian forces also drove Ukrainian forces out of positions in around Avdiivka. The ISW has not observed evidence to substantiate those claims, though several Russian mill bloggers additionally claimed that Russian forces advanced northwest of Bakhmut in Bakhmut and Bodanivka and south of the Bakhmut reservoir, which I think we have seen over the last week, and geolocated footage from around the 7th shows that Russian forces have advanced south of the Bakhmut reservoir. So this is to say that, and I reported this the other day, the Russians have pushed the Ukrainians back south of this Bakhmut reservoir and towards Bodanivka. We've also heard of advances elsewhere in this general area. So I really do think the Russians are moving to a more offensive posture in the area. These localized offensive operations northwest and southwest of Bakhmut are likely opportunistic tactical ground attacks intended to take advantage of the reported reallocation of Ukrainian resources away from Bakhmut. Several mill bloggers noted that the pace of Ukrainian artillery fire and ground activity in the area has decreased in recent days, and that Russian sources remarking that this is partially because Ukrainian forces have redeployed to other areas of the front. So that is to say that the Ukrainians obviously don't see this as a major objective anymore. The idea previously, at least as far as I was concerned, was taking advantage of momentum whilst also attriting and fixing Russian troops in the area. Well, perhaps that's not so important. There are obviously more important needs required of the Ukrainian soldiers there. So yeah, Russian forces are unlikely able to translate offensive efforts near Bakhmut into wider and more meaningful offensive operations, as the Russian force grouping around Bakhmut is weak and disorganized because Russian forces have been committing more manpower and material to deliberate and larger scale offensive operations near Avdiivka and on the Kharkiv-Luhansk Oblast border. So this is a claim that, although I've previously said the Russians have quite a few troops in this area, they would bring them in to stop the Ukrainians from taking more and more land. They have also redeployed some of their own troops from there, as the Ukrainians appear to have done themselves. So it's not immediately clear that the Russians will have huge successes in the counterattacks around this area. I can't imagine the Ukrainians would have gone to such efforts to take this and then just, willingly give it back to the Russians. So I would have thought they'd put up some kind of fight in the area. Otherwise, it renders the whole thing rather pointless. But I guess we'll have to see what happens over the next few days. Right, we're going to come down now to the Avdiivka area, where, as you can imagine, things are still fairly heated, but not any change to any of the mappers. Right. Ukrainian Tavrisk Force group of forces spokesperson Stupan has noted that Russian forces have increased their use of aviation in the Avdiivka direction over the past few days and are using Ka-52 and Mi-8 and Su-25 attack aircraft. So that's two types of helicopter and the Su-25 fixed-wing aircraft. The Ukrainian General Staff reported that Russian forces with aviation support have attacked both north and south of Avdiivka in all the usual places: Pervomaisky, Krasnohorivka, Vodyanya, Opitny, these kind of Severny areas, all of these areas open to attack Stepova as well. In fact, in the area, Syriac Maps has a map, though no changes, but they do say that the Russian and Ukrainian army are that clashes are taking place between them on the outskirts of the village of Stepova, as the first ones are trying to capture to take the forest areas. Quite sure what they mean there, other than to say that the tree lines here between Stepova and the railway line are going to be open season for the Russians as they make their move to try and operationally encircle Avdiivka. As Andrew Perpetua says, and this is referring to his mapping change that we saw yesterday along this tree line, and also up, so it's the blue lines we're looking at here, up in this tree line to the north of that settlement, also taking that settlement into account. and further down the railway line here, that is, as you can see, what Andrew Perpetua saw the Russians as taking yesterday. And he says north of Avdiivka, Russia has taken control over the area around the railroad. There's a bit of confusing video of Russians shelling this same area with BMPs, but perhaps that video was from prior to this advance. So, yeah, the Russians are trying to make a go at Avdiivka still, but the claims are it's still pretty expensive for them. As we come down south, we pass Mariinka and Vuhledar, where I don't think there's too much information coming out. We have just a little bit here that Ukrainian, I couldn't quite work this out. So this is the idea that the Ukrainian forces had liberated the Dacha area south of Vuhledar. The Russian forces were unable to hold that area. So usually when you're talking about the Dacha area south of Vuhledar, you're talking about this area that is broadly to the east, southeast really of the town. Otherwise, you're coming down to Dacha areas that are part of Mikilska or Pavlivka. So I'm unsure what exactly is meant here. Maybe the Russians had got up into this area where they have been previously, and they were beaten back previously. Maybe that has happened again. I'm just not sure exactly what is meant of that particular area. Anyway, moving on, we come down to the ISW does talk about localized fighting is ongoing near Vuhledar, particularly east of Vuhledar, near Mikilska, as well. East of Vuhledar, near Mikilska. I presume that's the same activity. So that's east of Vuhledar, I guess, over here where we have seen activity take place, rather than just east of there before you get to Mikilska. Nonetheless, usual kind of claims here. No changes in mapping, but still quite a lot of activity. Russian forces conducting 23 attacks near Mariinka and Novomikhailivka, just to the north of here. So it's all fairly active around here, even if there are no mapping changes. Right, let's move to the east towards Zaporizhzhia. Now, there's nothing to report of Velika Novosilka particularly, so we're going to move to Robotina, where you can see some pins in favour of the Ukrainians around the Verbove area and a couple of pins in favour of the Russians slightly to the south there. Right, let's look around the Verbove area, where I think things are looking a little bit more positive for the Ukrainians. I've seen quite a bit of footage, a few trench lines with littered with sort of Russian bodies and whatnot. I don't mean to demean human life there, but in terms of the battle for the area north of Verbove, I think the Ukrainians are starting to gain a bit of momentum. We have Andrew Perpetua showing a little bit of a gain around this area, sort of a triangle here, just north of Verbove, but far as deep state maps, there's quite a large area taken here, which I think is not necessarily taken the last day, because they had quite a bit of land that the Russians controlled that the other mappers didn't have. So I think it's a mixture of realignment and Ukrainians pushing the Russians back there, but also north towards Novopokrovka. So it's a good day for the Ukrainians, possibly north of Verbove. Ukrainian forces have taken back several positions in recent counter-offensive actions northwest of Avdiivka, says War Monitor. And here we have Global War Monitor saying Ukraine has made an advancement across the contested area north of Avdiivka, and military labs saying during the last few days Ukrainian forces have been able to make decent progress near Verbove. Initially, Ukrainians were able to kick the Russian troops out of their advanced positions north of the main line of defense in the area between Verbove and Novoprokopivka. Based on geolocated footage, it appears that now the area is back under Ukrainian control. Furthermore, Ukrainians captured several positions in the tree lines northwest of Verbove, forcing the Russian troops to reposition close to the outskirts of the town. As I say, good news there, and that will hopefully allow the Ukrainians to move down this road north of Verbove towards Novofedorivka and allow them to get closer to the trench lines north of Verbove. But of course, really, you want to come through the gap here where the trenches aren't, as it goes. You know, you've got the entrance to the town, rather than have to go through trench lines in multiple places. But it seems like that will be a really tough nut for the Ukrainians to crack. Right, the ISW says of the area, no, before we get to Kherson, it says that there is geolocated evidence here of Ukrainian advancement. The Ukrainians' 15th NG Karadag advanced northwest of Verbove and repelled a Russian counterattack by the 7th VDV division there. BMD dismounts under mortar, cluster munitions, and small arms fire, sustaining multiple casualties. I presume that's the Russians there. As we copy that into Google Earth, we get this as a geolocation for where the Ukrainians were active, and that didn't seem to work. Not actually as easy on Google Chrome. I'm on Chrome today rather than Edge, and it doesn't like it as much. So that suggests that the deep state map movement is correct, that the Ukrainians are arguably advancing northwest of Verbove, but still behind the Russian, or in front of the Russian lines, as according to now all the mappers, and that's what you'd expect. As you advance, you go through the grey zone first. And so some gains for the Ukrainians there. I think that's good news. Now we're going to come down to the Novoprokopivka and the southern part of this salient, and you can see Syriac Maps has some gains there for the Russians. Actually, it's not Syriac Maps. Sorry, it's Andrew Perpetua, just north of the northern elements of the town of Novoprokopivka, are back robustly under the control of the Russians there. Anyway, we'll move on now to Kherson. Just the TLDR of that is the Ukrainians might be gaining a little bit of momentum back in that northern Verbove area. Right, Kherson, although there are no mapping changes, I think it's quite dynamic, and there are rumors that the Ukrainians have interdicted this road to the south of Krinky, which, as you can see, is firmly in the Russian-controlled zone, but the Ukrainians have been going through this wooded area. In a live stream today, I think this is the road that Tim White was hinting at, and there were some people in the comments saying that the Ukrainians had control of this road. Whether that's fires control or direct control, I'm not 100% sure, but certainly the Ukrainians are having some success in this general area. We'll go to some of the sources. So Andrew Perpetua talks of a little bit of mapping around there. So Russian drones attacking Ukrainian infantry made me mark this area as contested, and that is just around Pidstepny, so just to the south of, or southwest of Krinky. We have Pidstepny, and it could be that more of that, as Andrew Perpetua says, is now contested, as the Ukrainians are hitting the Russians with all sorts of stuff, I guess. And then we come on to Ukrainian Marine officer in Kherson says, "Good morning. Events on the left bank are gradually developing in our favour. We are making progress, and there are great prospects for further development. The presence of armoured vehicles indicates that a bridgehead has been created for the one-at-a-time transfer of vehicles that can float, amphibious vehicles. So it is too early to talk about pontoons. The Russians do not bring up reserves. They fight back with what they have." So a couple of important bits to note is that the Russians aren't bringing reserves into this area, as is, well, at least that's what the Ukrainians claim, and that they are bringing vehicles across, but they are one at a time, and they are amphibious vehicles. So I showed you some footage in the news piece this morning. Wasn't certain it was from Kherson, from the Dnipro River, but some are claiming that that is video footage of a BMP, of an infantry fighting vehicle crossing the river, and that will be useful for the Ukrainians if they can do that. The other, then we go to military labs here, talking about another element of the warfare that's taking place there, and we'll go to the ISW in a second for lots of detail, is that the Ukrainians have been degrading the Russian air defense capabilities here and their electronic warfare capabilities, which will then degrade their usage of drones and counter-battery fire. And this will mean that the Ukrainians can operate with far greater ease in crossing Dnipro and taking territory back on the left bank. Super important. They seem to be doing a fairly good job of tying all of these threads together in committing their forces and having success. So here we have Military Lab saying Ukrainian first-person view drone operators eliminated another Russian drone operator on the east bank of the Dnipro River, this time in the town of Dripiani, so which is up by Korsonka. Yep, up here, Dnipriani there. They are hitting with drones there. They're also doing quite a lot of activity in Korsonka, which indicates that Kherson could be next on the list of places to take. Recently, Ukraine has deployed some of its best drone units to the Dnipro front, resulting in a complete dominance in the drone warfare over the Russian-controlled areas on the left bank of the river. This is being borne out by lots of sort of snippets and bits of evidence and commentary from various sources. So I think the Ukrainians, again, are tying all their threads together here and doing a fairly decent job. And their drone operators are causing some havoc for the Russian forces. Now, Suriyat Maps has some control exchange here for territory in favor of the Ukrainians on the delta just south of Kherson, but it doesn't change the Russian defensive line, so you won't see it on my map, but it is concerning an area of the islands, as I say, to the southwest, of Kherson. So Suriyat Maps says situation in Kherson, Russian bombardment over Belgorod Island confirms the Ukrainian army controls the dachas to the north of it. So that is this area here. They apparently control all of that. As you can see from Andrew Perpetua, he has part of those dachas in control of the Russians. I wonder if that changes at all. The Suriyat Maps is changing this from grey zone to Ukrainian control there, which I think is good news for the Ukrainians. Now, the ISW has quite a lot of commentary on Kherson, and I think that indicates how serious it is there and an important bridgehead for the Ukrainians. The Russian military command, they say, will likely struggle to redeploy combat effective reinforcements to respond to ongoing Ukrainian operations in eastern Kherson Oblast while conducting defensive operations in western Zaporizhzhia and sustaining other offensive efforts in eastern Ukraine. Russian mill bloggers claimed on the 9th that Ukrainian forces established control over new positions in Krinky and conducted assaults towards Russian positions south and southwest of the settlement. That's what I was talking about, through the forest area toward that road. Russian mill blogger claimed that there are reports that Ukrainian forces advance in forest areas south of Krinky and that they've attacked near Poima, Pishchenivka and Pidstepny again, so the same sort of places being mentioned. Just to the southwest of Krinky, you've got Kazachi Lahiri, and then Pidstepny, Pishchenivka and Poima attacking all along this front there. Ukrainian military observer Moshevets stated that north of Poima, to the Antonivsky roadway bridge north of Oleshki, what is happening, the Ukrainian forces have established continuous control of positions. Sorry, I missed a line. From the Antonivsky bridge to the roadway bridge and north of Poima. So that is all around here that the Ukrainians have robust control, which I think, we've known for some time, really. And what else? That they also have cut the Oleshki Novokakovka road in at least 2 areas. So you've got Oleshki and you've got Novokakovka up here. So what is that road? Well, it's probably the one that goes along here, but it could well be this main road, the E97, which actually then turns into another road as it comes towards Novokakovka, and this is the one that has been claimed to be interdicted south of Krinky. So I'm not quite sure what the ISW is referring to, because I think this other road that goes right along and connects all of these settlements up right along the riverbank, I think it's been interdicted in a number of places and for some time. Elements of the Russian 18th Combined Arms Army, motorized rifle, 70th Motorized Rifle Division, 177th Naval Infantry Brigade, so that is Marines, appear to be the main Russian forces responding to Ukrainian ground operations there. The Russian military reportedly reformed the 18th CAA, the Combined Arms Army, from other units previously operating in the Kherson direction, and it's unlikely that the new units are comprised of fresh forces or staffed to doctrinal end strength. In other words, you're piecing together these larger units from smaller degraded units. You are going to have an issue with cohesion, an issue with being at full fighting strength, so on and so forth. The elements of the 177th Naval Infantry Brigade were previously defending positions in western Zaporizhzhia for almost the entirety of the Ukrainian counteroffensive and have likely suffered significant casualties themselves. The Russian Ministry of Defense stated on the 5th that unspecified elements of the 7th Guards Airborne, so these are the 7th Guards Airborne VDV group that went to support in Robotina for the Russians, that they are operating in the Kherson direction now. So they were pulled down from the north to support in Zaporizhzhia and now been pulled from Zaporizhzhia to support in Kherson. Again, this supports the idea that there aren't quite enough. There isn't a great depth in reserves. I've talked about them running out of reserves. Or they're pulling reserve from the north to support here when they were needed. And then the Ukrainians started having some success along the Dnipro. And that same group is pulled from Robotina to Dnipro. Then that shows that they don't have that strength in depth. Anyway, to continue, Mashevets claimed on the 2nd and 9th that elements of the 7th VDV are operating near Avdiivka and Poima, but it's unclear if these reported elements have been present in the Kherson direction since the start of the counteroffensive or recently redeployed to the area. I mean, either way, it means that whole unit is split up. Either they're split up along the whole front line, really, from Liman down to Kherson, or they've been moved wholesale multiple times, showing that they don't have that strength in depth. So element of the 49th CAA reportedly been operating in the Kherson direction since the Ukrainian liberation of the city in 2022 November. But some Russian and Ukrainian sources claim that the Russian command has since redeployed elements of at least one of its brigades to Zaporizhzhia. Mashevets claimed that elements of the 49th comprise the Russians' Dnipro grouping of forces in the Kherson direction, and elements of the 49th have also appeared operating on the left bank as of August 2023. Okay, so finally, Russian command will likely face significant challenges in redeploying units from other sectors of the front should relatively combat ineffective Russian formations and currently uncommitted Russian forces in the Kherson direction prove insufficient to respond to the Ukrainian operations on the East Bank. Redeployments of considerable elements of the 7th VDV division or other VDV formations and units in western Zaporizhzhia Oblast would likely disrupt Russian defensive operations there. Russian forces reportedly continue to accumulate forces for sustaining the Russian offensive effort near Avdiivka and localized offensive operations in Kharkiv and Luhansk. Any potential Russian redeployment to Kherson direction will likely degrade the Russian ability to sustain these operations, these other ones, and efforts. Right. So we've heard some Russians say that they are not. Oh no, sorry. We heard the Ukrainian commander say that the Russians are unable to bring reserves into this area, and they're fighting with what they've got, which fits together with what Mashevets, that observer, has observed, and this idea that you are bringing the 7th down because you can't bring anyone else, which means that if you are going to bring forces to support in Kherson, you will be pulling them from other areas where they are needed and they are being used. So either you don't defend Kherson or you do defend it and leave yourself weak elsewhere. And this is what Tim White was talking about in a live earlier, that if they do bring them down from Zaporizhzhia, then that leaves this area around Robotina potentially more vulnerable to a continued Ukrainian attack. So it's difficult for the Russians. It again goes back to the analogy of having a blanket that's not quite big enough for the bed. You put it in one direction to cover yourself over in that corner, and it leaves the bed bare in another area. That's what the Russian defenses are like, it seems, at the moment, unless they get more reinforcements from mobilization from Russia, which of course they're continually doing through the crypto mobilization. But I think that goes to talk to how potentially important this incursion, or no, it's not an incursion, this offensive into Kherson might be. It might be really useful and be interesting, so interesting to see how that develops over the coming week, because the Ukrainians themselves don't have huge amounts of forces. They are potentially redeploying forces from the Bakhmut area, as we've seen, to elsewhere. So it looks like both sides don't have enough uh, capacity do the offensives they really want to do, and that is meaning that they're robbing Peter to pay Paul on both sides of the front line. So anyway, let me know what you think. Please like, subscribe, and share. Thanks for watching. Toodle pips, and I'll speak to you soon.